only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics, WallBuilders Live. You can find us online at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. Faith and politics, we also mean faith in the culture. So we're talking about any area of the culture that needs to be influenced, which is every area of the culture, needs to be influenced with our faith and with those foundational values that made America great in the first place. So, David, today we're going to talk a little bit about, federal government largesse and how it's managed to grow so much and what to look for to turn it around.
Yeah, we're going to look at some expectations, because now that you have a Republican House and a Senate, what do you expect from them? What are they going to do, and what are they going to do with the problems we have in the current government? And this is where it's really key to understand something on expectations. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. In other words, if you have an expectation and you don't reach it, then it really does drag you down. You get depressed or whatever. It makes the heart sick. You get discouraged. So what we want to do is make sure that we have the right expectation. You know, I can have the hope that if I jump off a roof, anti-gravity is going to kick in and I won't fall. But that's not a realistic expectation. I would still be depressed if I fell and, my hope didn't kick. So it's really important that we get I guess we would say a practical but a realistic expectation. What can we expect from the House and Senate now that they're both in conservative hands, or at least in Republican hands, which is much more conservative than Democrat? That doesn't mean Republicans are conservative, not yet, but they're moving that way. What can we expect? And
David, if I may ask, I guess that's because if you don't have realistic expectations in the political realm anyway, you're going to be hugely disappointed and then think the system doesn't work.
And then you'll stay home 2 years from now when we really need people turning out. And so you have to manage expectations, and that's not talking down. It's just, look, this is where you and I talk so often about how important process is. If you don't understand process, you will never get the results that you need. You've got to know the process. What we've mentioned, the U.S. Senate is run by rules. Thomas Jefferson, 16 of the rules the U.S. Senate still uses today were written by Thomas Jefferson. That's part of the process. There are things that you have to do. Process works for everybody on all sides of the issue. It doesn't favor one side or the other. So you got to know the process, and the Founding Fathers set up a process constitutionally. So under the process that they set up constitutionally, what logically can we expect from the House and Senate? And it may not be everything we want because the Constitution doesn't allow them to do everything we want right now. So to manage those expectations and say, hey, we're still making progress, constitutionally speaking and conservative speaking, still making it. One of the guys who's been through this before and has had to see these kind of things happen is Congressman Bob McEwen. We have him on regularly. He's one of the most optimistic guys I know, but he's one of the most knowledgeable and realistic guys. And so it's going to be interesting to see what he says about what can we do in a Republican House and Senate now that we've got it. What do we expect from these guys? What are our realistic expectations?
Former Congressman Bob McEwen when we return right here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Crime is one of America's most serious problems today. Its effects reach not only the direct victims of its violence, but even those who have not been attacked. The concern for crime has not been limited to this century, however. Our Founding Fathers were also concerned about it. Yet the effects of crime unquestionably were much less in their generation. So what was their deterrent to crime? Signer of the Constitution James McHenry answered that question. He explained, "The Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace. In vain, without the Bible, we increase penal laws and draw protections around our institutions. Bibles are strong defenses. Where they abound, men cannot pursue wicked courses." Founding Father James McHenry believed that widely teaching the Bible was the best means to deter crime.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Our guest today, our good friend, former Congressman Bob McEwen. Always good to have you, sir. Thanks for coming on, sir.
You know, the honor is mine. Great to be with you, Rick.
Well, appreciate all that you do, and thanks for joining us again at the Legislators Conference and sewing into those state legislators across the country. They always love hearing from you, and I love hearing from you. It gives me more material that I can steal from you, as always.
Well, it was a great event. As you know, there are 99 state legislative houses in America, and 69 of the 99 are controlled by the Conservative Party, which is the Republican Party of the two in America, and that's lots of new legislators. It's a very good sign. Scripture says not to become weary in well-doing, and I served 24 years in elected office, state legislative in Congress and elsewhere, and never was in the majority from 1929 until 1995. The Congress of the United States, that's 70 years. That's a third of the history of the United States.
Not that you were there in 1929, though, right? Just to be sure.
No, yeah, but once FDR and his crowd came in and built Washington and procreated after itself, one party dominated that entire period except for 48 months. And so now, as we see within 2 votes of the highest of the conservative watermark in the House, and then 10 votes in the Senate, and then 31 governors and 69 out of 99 state legislative houses. This is not the time for us to say that it's too bleak for us to roll up our sleeves and get involved, because the American people are in favor of conservative government, and it's our responsibility to provide the candidates to achieve it. So I appreciate your work, and that's why I want to help any way I can.
Well, you speak of exactly what our topic is today, the mess that's been handed to those leaders from all those years that you just mentioned of liberal leadership. Now they have to turn that around, and so you've got a situation where you've got a built-in federal bureaucracy that has grown just massively out of control, and this article that just came out, thousands of federal workers on extended paid leave. So it's not just a bureaucracy that's at work. It's a bureaucracy that's not even working and still getting paid, millions and millions, billions and billions of dollars. What is the turnaround formula for these folks that have taken office in order to change this culture of huge government?
Well, it's important to make the observation that our system was designed not to be efficient. It was designed to prevent tyranny. And so in order for it to move, you need to have all 3 of the key branches of the government. You need to have the House, the Senate, and the President. And when you have those 3 working in unison, then they can go in a particular direction. As we mentioned, that's happened in the 30s and the 40s and the 60s and the 70s and all that. But if one of those is controlled by someone else, for example, if Ronald Reagan is the president, even though he doesn't control the House and the Senate, what it can do is they can prevent it from moving down that line further. But it takes all 3 to change direction. Let me explain. Congress can set up an environmental protection agency. In order to do that, it has to have an authorization. That gives it the authority to do something. Then every year you come back for a budget and you get the appropriation, or you get the money to operate year by year, but the authorization is ongoing. So in order to change the direction, to change the authorization to do something, you have to have the House and the Senate agree with the president. So when Ronald Reagan was president, people said, well, he didn't change things. Well, the reason he couldn't change things, he could control spending, and he did get some tax cuts passed by all 3 of them agreeing on that for a brief period. And so his leadership was primarily in defense and foreign policy, but he wasn't able to change the direction of the bureaucracy because Tip O'Neill and George Mitchell and the liberals controlled the Congress. So at this current time, we have now, for only the second time in my lifetime, the House and the Senate are under Republican control, but the president is there, and he can veto or prevent the Congress from doing anything. Why? Just recall what we said. That is, it was designed like this to prevent tyranny, to keep anybody from running off with it. So it's very complicated. So now we hope that the Congress will control spending somewhat, but in order to make a change, to actually undo some of these, I'd like to see a president come in and say, this country operated for 180 years without this agency and is going to do it again. It operated for 212 years without this department and is going to do it again. It'd be nice to have somebody come in and just wholesale take a lot of this burden off of the back of the American taxpayer and the American government. But short of that, we will need a control of the spending for it. But then to make those changes, we'll need a president that agrees with us as well, and that's coming up in 24 months.
So it's almost like the group that's in there now has to put the brakes on the slide towards socialism. They can stop that. But what you're saying is really to see the real reverse, it's going to take time. We can't expect that in the next 6 months.
Well, it'll take leadership. It'll take someone in the White House. Now, currently, what we've seen has happened, as we mentioned, defense is under the leadership of the president. He is the commander-in-chief, and so we saw Ronald Reagan was able to restore. The first thing he did, for example, he had a zero tolerance for drugs. I remember specifically everybody under Jimmy Carter, a third of the military. I'll pause for a moment. 1 in 3 in the U.S. military in the late 70s was using some sort of drugs. Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, and Ronald Reagan went to a zero drug tolerance. And I can remember the hearings on Capitol Hill. Everybody said, there's no way, you can't throw everybody out. Well, what happened was two things. Number one, the people that were the druggies got thrown out, and then good people that had not signed up for join the military throughout the 70s began, and the military in the 1980s was restored to the strength that it in Kuwait in the Battle of the Desert Storm in less than 100 hours, defeated the fourth largest army in the world. So now, all of that's inverted. All of that's upside down at the moment. We have Barack Obama, and what has happened to that military. The Navy is now the smallest it has been since William McKinley, since before World War I. The Army is the smallest it's been since before Pearl Harbor. It's smaller than it was when we were attacked on December 7th, 41. And the Air Force is the smallest it's ever been in the history of the United States of America. When the day that the United States Air Force was created, it was larger than it is now. So our defense is under the control of the president, and so our foreign policy is in utter shambles around the world. That's under his control. Our defense is diminishing as we speak. That's under his control. Now, as for the departments, we can make some changes in spending that because we do control the spending power in the Congress, and I hope that we'll be able to do that. But this nation has never been in greater need of genuine leadership than it is at this moment.
Our guest today is Congressman Bob McEwen. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us right here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Shortly after the American Revolution, America had become the envy of the world. It still remains a wonder of the modern world as 219 years later, America has become the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. What was the foundation upon which our founding fathers established this great nation? According to John Adams, the foundation was Christianity. John Adams declared, "The general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Now I will avow that I then believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God." According to founding father John Adams, it was the principles of Christianity which formed the foundation for American government.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We're back. Thanks for staying with us. Congressman Bob McEwen with us today on WallBuilders Live. And Congressman McEwen, we're talking in the last segment, you were talking about just the importance of leadership, that's how you turn this thing around is electing the right folks and having good leadership that understands the value of freedom. So, you know, we're coming up on a presidential election now in the next 2 years. What would you encourage citizens to look for in these next 2 years in the presidential race for the type of leader that could turn this thing around?
Well, there has to be someone who understands that freedom creates wealth. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth. That's not complicated. That is, government has nothing that it doesn't first take from someone else. So whenever a politician says, vote for me, I'm going to give you this, educational process. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you health care. I'm going to give you these things. That politician is saying, I am not an entrepreneur. I cannot create a product that people will voluntarily purchase. I do not have the leadership to put together an organization to make something. I am going to use the police power of the state to take from those people across the street and give it to you. Now, there's a term for that that's called tyranny, and it diminishes freedom. So the nations that do that the most are the poorest. The cities that do it the most are the poorest. The states that do it the most are the poorest. But the greater the freedom, that is, where a person creates something and people slam on their brakes and pull in and say, oh, I would like to have that. Therefore, I reach in my pocket, I reward you, and we both are better off. We have created wealth. Those are the people that allow us to proceed and to progress. That's what America has done. So what do you say we need? We need to have leaders that understand that government is not the solution, because government does not have anything that does not first take from someone else. And this whole idea that government is merely an insurance company, and these people are pathetic insurance salesmen who go around and say, I'm going to sell you health insurance, but I'm not skilled enough to sell it. So I'm going to write a law that says you have to buy health insurance from my insurance company. And now we see that it's up to the average state, the 40 to 50% of their budget is on their health insurance policies that these failed insurance salesmen, who are called politicians, have forced people to buy. And that's what Obamacare is where we are forcing people to purchase health care insurance that they don't want, that they could that costs 4 times as much as it did before, with a deductible of $5,000 and $6,000. Listen, Rick, with a deductibility of $5,000 or $6,000 per family, we could get health insurance for $100 a month.
Yeah.
But now they're going to cost thousands of dollars and get far less. Why? Because they're incompetent insurance salesmen called politicians who ran for office promising to do such a thing. What do we need? We need someone who simply understands that the creation of wealth comes from the free market, and to get government off of our back, out of our pocket, and out of our billfolds.
The last time we had a president that seemed to really understand economics and was educated pre-Keynesian was Reagan, of course, and you were there and you were part of that. When he ran, you had a lot of people, even in the Republican Party and certainly in the media, that said, oh, he's just too conservative, he's too radical, he's this, he's that. Do you think we'll hear that cry this next year, next 2 years, as we look for a presidential candidate in the Republican Party? And how do we respond to that? I mean, we don't want another milquetoast, middle-of-the-road candidate, do we?
Nope. We want somebody who knows and understands why. Ronald Reagan was an economics major, and he, as you mentioned, he understood it inside and out. Therefore, he was able to do the right things. One of the topics that you and I were observing was that every year, tens of thousands of federal workers are paid just to stay home. 57,000 employees last year of 3 months or above. That means their employer, the boss, will just say, well, you're not getting along. Why don't you go home for 6 months? They get paid to stay home up to a year or more, costing nearly $1 trillion, $700 billion, $775 million, according to this one report. Now, why are they able to do that? Because it's not their money. If it was a business, they would say, we're not going to pay you to sit home and do nothing. But when it's not your money and the supervisor says, take off a month, your daughter's getting married, right, you work on it. It's because government operates differently from the private sector. It is not rewarded for what it does for people, only because of the power that it has. And America is the richest, most powerful nation on earth for one reason, one only, because it has been the freest. And what we need are candidates for office that understand and appreciate that, the American system. And when we do it, this country can take off like a rocket.
Amen. Amen. Last question I got for you. I had Marsha Blackburn on a week or two ago, and we were talking about all the bills that the House had passed that Reid never even took up. And I was shocked to find out how many, I think she told me 100 and something, that were actually veto-proof. So is it possible that in this next 2 years, we could end up with the most, veto-overridden president in history? Do you think the House and Senate have the ability to push through some things with a veto proof?
Well, they have the legislative ability. Whether they have the mental ability remains to be seen. And interesting that good old Harry Reid cut himself in his own petard. What happens is our system is designed that you introduce a bill, it goes to committee, people are testified, they consider it, they amend it by the information they receive, they bring it to the floor, and the floor votes. Harry Reid has bypassed. He has been the most dictatorial, unbelievably like a Caesar dominating the Senate. And that is, he's had only 12 amendments offered on the floor of the House in the last year. And what he would do is bypass the entire committees. He'd write the bills in his office and bring them to the floor without anybody ever having been able to see them, and have these large, thick bills. Now, what happened as a byproduct of those very few times, not allowing any votes, not allowing any amendments, not allowing anybody to see anything, is that they didn't vote that much. And so when his term, he wanted to protect them so they didn't have to take any tough decisions. But when they ran in Alaska and in Louisiana and in Virginia and in North Carolina and these places, they found out that the Democrat senators had voted 97, 98, 99% of the time with Barack Obama, because Harry Reid didn't let them vote except when he said so. And he actually ended up messing his own arrangement by bypassing the system, being so dictatorial that the American people threw him out.
Wow. Well, we're certainly looking forward to a non-Harry Reid-led Senate this next year. So, Congressman McEwen, always a pleasure to have you, sir. Looking forward to having you back.
Thanks, Rick. All the best, brother.
That's Congressman Bob McEwen. Back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall, in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty, and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks to former Congressman Bob McEwen. Always good to have him, David. I tell you, I just love listening to him. I learn so much every time.
I tell you, when you look at expectations, I mean, and by the way, got to point out, he is exactly right. Look at the conservative gains made in recent years as compared to 20 years ago. I mean, we've gone 70 years without many conservative gains, and now look what we've got in governorships and state legislatures. Look how far the House and Senate has moved, not just Republicans, but with conservatives in there. After the election, we talked about this new freshman class coming in, how many conservatives are in there. So we really are moving in a very good direction. But going back to the expectations, he made such a key point. He said our system was not designed to be efficient. It was designed to prevent tyranny. And to have control, you have to have all three branches if you want to move in a different direction. So we've got the House and Senate. We don't have the presidency. So constitutionally, we're not going to move this thing very far in a different direction. Now, we can stop some of the bad direction that's going on. We can prevent some of the tyranny that's out there, but you have to have all three to move it, and that's what we're looking to do 2 years from now. But that's why you have to know the process. And that constitutional process, he's right, it's not designed to be efficient and let us get done what we want to do. It's designed to prevent tyranny. And right now we have an imbalanced government in that you have two houses under one party and one president under the other, and that's what you use as a check. But that's not going to let us get a whole lot of stuff done, but that's all right. We've got expectations now that at least we can slow down the bleeding. We'll start turning this thing around in 2 years if we'll keep people together.
How important is it to, for your expectations for this next year, 2 years, 3 years to be measured and correct, but also to be willing to look further than that, to have that long-term view? We talk a lot about that generational kind of perspective that we know this can't change in one election. It does take time.
Well, how optimistic is it when you look back over what Bob covered for the last 70 years? You go, wow, we really have made some gains. Now, if you look back just 2 years, you don't see that many gains. But if you look back over the last 70 years, yeah, we've really made some. And by the way, even with what we can expect this time, you mentioned that you thought maybe 100 bills were veto-proof when we talked to Marsha Blackburn. Let me go back to those numbers. She said 300 bills were veto-proof. There were 387 bills the House passed, the Senate did not pass. That 300 of them were veto-proof because 200 of them were unanimous. 100 more had 75% support of Democrats, and 60 of those bills had been introduced by the Democrats. So you're looking at really about 298 or 300 bills that would be veto-proof if you can get that going through the Senate. Now, that doesn't mean the Senate is veto-proof. That means the House was. So that's still really good. And so we can expect a lot of change, but it's not going to be everything that everybody wants. I mean, it's not that simple to overturn the president's executive orders on immigration. That takes a while. It's going to take a couple of years. Under our constitutional process, that's what it's going to take. That's all right. We're moving in the right direction. And so what Bob did by pointing us back 70 years helps us understand that this is a slow process. But look how much ground we have gained. We can keep this going.
Absolutely. It's this could have been a Good News Friday, bro.
Yeah, you're right. You're exactly right.
Good stuff. Special thanks to Congressman Bob McEwen for joining us today, and thank you, our listeners, for listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand